this panel is part of our conversation series and is hosted on the occasion of this exhibition, Bodies of Work, curated by Corinne Botz, who's here all the way to the right, presented at Baxter Street in partnership with the National Young Arts Foundation. And we also have Corinne's solo show in our secondary space at 128 as well, Milk Factory. So I wrote this introduction on my phone in the notes application on the subway after dropping my sons at school, in the waiting room at the doctor's office during G's asthma attack, in between turns of an epic Monopoly game where Libby was present and teaching the little ones what the word shrewd really meant, on the bathroom floor cheering on my toddler's potty training, in between meetings for Baxter Street, and to be quite honest, in the middle of the night. So I also reread excerpts from my book, How We Do Both Art and Motherhood, alongside a lecture that Rachel had written and generously shared with me called The Poetics of Motherhood. Interwoven with my own experience as a Latina presenting as a white woman, white mother, I cowered over the idea of trying to find a thread to weave a common ground among these three accomplished artists here tonight, Nona, Faustine, Corinne, Botz, and Rachel Zucker. While each one of the artists and writer here tonight have their own unique path, the goal of tonight's conversation is to celebrate the difference, to perhaps add to the shifting narratives around motherhood and maker, a narrative that is grossly underrepresented and misaligned in the canon of art history. Mother or not, each one of us navigates this busy world with choices we make, trying to maximize the most equalizing and daunting restriction, the undeniable truth that time does not bend or lie. Whether we want to squeeze in an extra hour at the studio, not miss the first steps, the failures, the everyday, time becomes acutely thin when life intervenes. So in Rachel's lecture, she writes, "Triage," she told her son. Do you know what triage is? She explained the concept of separating and sifting and prioritizing that doctors did in the ER rooms and during medical emergencies, and told him he had to do triage and attend to one thing at a time. And together they reordered his to-do list and sat together until he had done the first 4 things on the list. That's what she did on Thursday, instead of writing about the poetics of motherhood. So perhaps as mothers, we become acutely aware of the 2 most predominant markers of humans' understanding of time, birth and death. So with that, I would like to pass it off to Rachel to do her first reading, to introduce her work to the group.
It's so exciting to be here. I love this intimate group, and this amazing space, and this show is so fabulous, and I can't wait to hear these brilliant women talk. I'm going to read a piece called Death Project poem, to start off with something very uplifting. This piece is going to be in my book that's coming out in September called Sound Machine. And I think, maybe just for a tiny bit of context, I do talk about the photographer Sally Mann, who was a very important influence on my work. In college, I studied photography and thought maybe I'd be a photographer. And I was writing a lecture about how my influences are more from the visual arts in a way than from other poets and literature. And while I was writing that piece, that lecture, I also wrote this poem. And my youngest son, who's now 11, I have 3 sons, they're 19, 18, and 11. My youngest son has a very pervasive death phobia, as many people do, because it's scary. And that comes into this piece as well. Death Project. This will help. A grandmother surrounded by family and live musicians, there is nothing surprising except everything you are feeling. The giving way, the predictable, but never before you, this, she. This will help you arrange the words into meaningful, predictive, protective, at the scene to hold, reconstruct, stem the diverted, made way for, the giving way, words makes you watch. This will help you to smaller and smaller, skin looser, the healthy, afraid to mention, afraid to say, what is happening? As soon as you think you know what is happening, you do not know what is happening. It is happening not to you, afraid. It is happening to you. What? Your son says into the dark from bed. You're telling me I will cease to exist? Isn't there any way to stop this? Be there. Watch, stay, wait into the dark or the dim light, into whatever light there is as the breathing changes, yours, the mother's, the father's, the grandmother's, the other grandmother's, the other mother, the machine, to hear it, to stay here when you want to go out screaming into the diminished environment, the way we have ruined everything, and the we that wants desperately against everything you know is true to be anything other than I. You need to stay. Stay here. See what is happening to the diminishing, giving away. You need your words to reach into where there are no words. There are no words. People always say those words. Those words are the words people say. Stay there. Stay in the unmade room, in the still cardiac place, inside the house, the loosening skin, the polar ice caps giving way, the world warming, the bodies one by one losing heat inside the giving way, inside the way for a brief time. He, she, they, we treated each other as their selves, the polar diminishing animals, the vanishing. We were once hardy, with a sense of smell, touch, vision, feeling, taste, future. That's it, right? The belief that there will be something that does not warm or cool, a second more of. After the success and controversy surrounding her immediate family photographs, Sally Mann decided it was time to stop taking pictures of her 3 children and move on to something else. But what? She looked. She waited. One day, standing in the kitchen of her Virginia farmhouse, the sheriff called and told her there was an escaped convict on her farm and she had to get out. At that very moment, she saw him, running toward the house. Police running after him as he ran toward the house. He shot, they shot, police shotgun hit to the hip. The convict turned the pistol on himself. Later, she touched the pool of blood near the convict's head. It was surprisingly dark, she said. When she touched it, it moved, she said. She saw the ground take a sip. She began to photograph the place where he died. She began to go to places nearby where many had died long or short ago and photograph those places using the materials photographers had used during the Civil War. Then what? Then what remains? She was given access to a facility in which someone was studying the decomposition of human bodies, a facility in which human bodies were strewn, laid out in the open, fly-eaten, maggoted at various stages. Sally Mann made photographs of these bodies, plate after plate. Then close-up, long exposures of the children again, but not children anymore, rather living subjects and similar. Like her face, but not her face. Living, ethereal from the old-timey process, the lens open, hold, stay, okay. Prints made and framed, years of work crated and ready when the Pace Gallery in New York canceled the show at the last minute. Who wants to hang photos of dead bodies on their walls? Who would buy these? It is the only time in the film that Sally Mann cries on camera. Not when speaking about the death of her father or her favorite dog or the threats to charge her with child pornography and take her children and all her equipment into custody. I think the work is important, but maybe it isn't, Sally Mann says. Maybe it's important, but no one wants to see it, she says, wiping her nose. The inclusion of this information helps you navigate the aboutness of this poem, maybe the whyness. It is a transmission from the poet, a kind of decomposition. The poet is not the you, is no I either. Here, now, the poet takes this opportunity to say, this morning, standing in the hot shower, hoping heat would enter her body and be trapped there even for an hour, even minutes, knowing it would dissipate, unlike the arsenic mercury BPAs her cells won't give up. Which is the poem? Which is the poet? How does anything get inside anything else? Anyone? How do you get it out? You're telling me I will cease to exist, the boy says, into the night, into you, pressing into you, into the dark, his breathing catching, uneven. Not for a very long time, you say. But it is a short time. It is no time. There are rocks and trees and polar ice caps. It is no time at all. It is too short. It will feel like a long, long time, you tell the boy. Maybe you will be ready, you tell the boy. Maybe you will feel ready to give way, to let your muscles give way, even your heart to stop beating, let go of the sense of future, the holding tight, clutching to others, the we clinging, the way the poet clings to the boy, the night, the voice, the words. This poem will help you die, asserts the poet, not sure of anything. Take it, take it, take this, take it, she says. The mark you make in the present, weight of your body, the way you press into the present, you're in and out of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, a kind of gravity that holds you to this planet, a clinging to others, even as you repel as a single body. This is the meaning of, the fabric of. The only perceivables are past and future. The music of the room, the live musicians, the nurse reading a book into the space, the stranger, the doctor, the daughter, the friend, the gurney down the brightly lit, the home bedroom, the hospital bed, the box, the plot, the visiting hour, the hours, the breath. What did you think was going to happen? What did you think? There was another way of bearing up, a giving way, the giving way to, the suddenly, the slowly, the you saying someone else's pain is worse than the other, is lesser, is a blessing. The you who dreams the gone away souls back again, the you who goes on toward your own room, bed, stranger, daughter, friend, doctor. We has made paintings of this, and all the stories of the world, and none of all the stories in the world are the stories of what happens next. In the face of, I wrote fact of, but it is the face of it. The fact of it is not faceable. You never can know what it was like for anyone else. You never knew birth, fear, pleasure of anyone else. You have always been alone in the dark with a young boy asking you, how is this possible? You have always been alone in a room wanting a small other to ask anything of you. This is the only thing that makes you sure you're you. There, hearing a you, the you are. Hasn't anyone ever tried to stop this? The boy asks. Yes, you say. People try, but what happens after? He asks. No one knows, you say. After all this time? Really? He asks. Really, you say. And you're doing nothing about this? Make a poem called This Poem Will Help You Die. to hang on the wall for no one to buy. Here, says the poem, take it in.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So, I think that one of the themes that Corinne was working with, and I'd love for you to talk about this within the context of this poem, kind of talking about that, is this painting here that you curated in the show. I thought that this painting kind of spoke a lot about anchoring the show in the face of our own mortality and how we deal with that as mothers.
So this is a piece by Allison Elizabeth Taylor. It's called Still Life with Breast Pump. And as you can see, there's a strong reference to the Vanitas tradition, the skull and the clock. And yeah, I think, like when you become a parent, it makes you aware of mortality in like a different way. Someone else is like relying on you as your main source of food if you're nursing or pumping. What I also love about this piece is that it's also so like integrated into the studio practice, and this idea of like interruptions and the idea of trying to make work for 2 hours and then stop to pump, and that like once you have a kid, your solitude isn't quite like the same again because you're always aware of someone else that you're responsible for out in the world. And that's also another way I think that I connect with this idea of mortality, just being responsible in this very profound way for someone else's body, and being so, it connects you to the physical in a certain way as well, like life and death.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it was a perfect poem to read.
Yes.
Yes. As she was reading, I was like, wow.
I know. I couldn't help but make that. I don't want to take it too dark real quick, but I couldn't help but make that connection right away, because actually, as we were talking about it and as the conversation unfolds, it's interesting how almost each piece can really speak to that. And I love how, Nona, you sort of talk about that, not only in the piece that's present in this show, which that's Nona's piece over there, self-portrait with her daughter, Queen, but also throughout your work. Something that I think that I'd love for you to hear more about.
Yeah, like once you become a mother, it's not until you really understand what death means and how close you come to death, because like my mom always said, like when you're in labor, almost every strand of your hair is dead, everything is dead, and you're just that close from crossing over. So it's not till I had a C-section, so I'm on the table and you're seeing your blood hit the floor that you then understand it. But of course you have this new life and what that means, and you have to take care of it, and you see it grow and just go through all the many measures of giving life and nurturing life. But in my photography, the series, this comes out of the White Shoes series. And the White Shoes series is about slavery, the places where enslaved people lived, died, and buried. But in that, it's kind of my personal story as well. As I journey through life and what it means, not only the city but also the women who came before me. The African American women and that story and their connection with motherhood, and how their children were often taken away from them. So it became very much about kind of, in that image specifically, telling a story of how you see me in these other images by myself, and then this is the one image where you see me with a child. So it was as if I wanted to remember it as if in in that series she found her lost child, you know, that was taken away from her. They've been reunited in another place and universe. And so it was that image that I wanted to kind of bring that physically into the series and let people see that connection of you know, mother and child, specifically African American or African women and their children, because I feel like at the time when I took these images, I felt like that was something you didn't see a lot of. And in 2013, 2012, you didn't see a lot of images of Black women and their children. And I felt that was very significant, because that is a large story of slavery in America. You know, we were, you know, African American women were just machines, basically, having children for, you know, slavery, and their children, the whole idea of motherhood was not even something that they could embrace, but we did do it nonetheless on our own terms and whenever we could. So I thought that part of the story needed to be present in images, and that's why I have that image. And also my daughter, like she brought a new life to me, and a new way, a new ambition too. I had put photography down for a long time, and I know like some mothers say they've lost, they lose things, but I found my calling back, my craft, the urge to you know, go back to school as you did, and get our master's degree. So for me, like, you know, it was a real gift becoming a mother, that I didn't expect that part.
Yeah, I think that was something that we were in our MFA together at ICP Bard, and seeing you go through that with Queen being so young and myself and us paralleling, and I fed off your enthusiasm and like being able to just scream from the rooftops like, I'm a mother,
right?
You know, and I'm also an artist, and I'm not shy about it, and that sort of voice to me was so inspiring.
Yeah,
and, you know, and I think that maybe, Corinne, that was something that you thought about when you were doing the curation of the show, about the underrepresentation of mothers and the suppressed voice of even just being a mother, and what that meant in today's society.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you think of the art world as being so progressive, people still say things to you, like me and my friends we've exchanged stories about just little people who have lives who are like curators, who say things like, oh, are you still making any work since you had a kid? And you're like, oh, I just had a solo show like last year, you know? So somehow it's like all of a sudden you're like devoted, you're an artist, that you're a mom that makes art, or like this whole thing of, can you be a good artist and a good mom? And it seems so ridiculous that you even have to have that conversation, but really there's a bit of a taboo about making artwork that has to do with maternal experiences or motherhood, and hopefully that's changing. I know people are scared of being sentimental or where it stems from exactly, but you know, hopefully this show is part of changing that dialogue and opening it up. And you know, for me, it was just some of the artists in the show I've been friends with since before we had children. Other people like Lenka Clayton's work was inspiring to me when I became a mom, just how she, you know, had this manifesto and sort of this artist in motherhood, artist in residency, and the way that she thought of becoming a mother is like fueling her work, and is this site of like something that's productive rather than something that's makes her life just, I mean, sure, it's difficult to be a parent, but like more like you're saying, like something that becomes productive. So yeah, wanting to celebrate that work, and then, you know, contextualize my work in the other space, but sort of adding that conversation, and just, you know, they're amazing pieces, I think.
Yeah.
But I think because it's been taboo, it's been taboo because men ran the art world. And so having women who bring along children and, you know, making space for them, and that has been like, was just like diminished, you know, and just like not allowed. But as more women really got into the art world, asserted themselves, and made powerful art, that space have been opened up for us. And I think, you know, as we've made way in the 21st century and all across the board, I think, that has opened up for us.
Yeah, I think it is, like, motherhood is being seen more as like a serious topic and subject, and there's been so many books that were published even in the last year, so it is exciting to see.
I also think that your work in the Milk Factory, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's in the next door, but if you could talk about your work as sort of what that means to what Nona was saying, like you're kind of, in a lot of ways, by photographing those spaces, you're opening up the dialogue for not only what's already happening, but what's for improvement.
Yeah, so, there are photographs of lactation rooms where women pump milk, so for the most part, except sometimes peripherally, the women aren't in it, it's more about the spaces, and it came out of my own personal experience of wanting to record where I pumped at John Jay College, and it was like a strange space, and in my practice I'm interested in spaces, gendered space, how we compartmentalize space, really space, emotional, psychological space, all those type of ideas. And so I took the picture, and it wasn't until like a year or two later when I saw it and I thought, oh, actually this relates to all my practice, but of course it also brings in the subject of caretaking and the workplace and the body within the workplace. So I started this project of photographing lactation rooms, and it's just kind of a blind spot. I mean, lactation rooms are a way of talking about, in this larger sense of like caretaking and women's bodies, and like what the workplace does to mothering, and there's like so many topics that kind of feed into that, and like this idea of whether or not you have children or you decide to or not, that you'll be like respected and supported for that decision, in terms of the workplace environment, but just the larger social structure. So yeah. I forget what the question was. That's what
Well, I
just like this blind spot in culture.
Right.
Where people just don't know. Like a lot of well-meaning people just have like no idea what a lactation room is. I mean, again, like this sort of secrecy, and I think it's this larger movement of like women wanting to talk more openly about reproductive issues, and for me, just like shedding light on pumping is a way to kind of create a larger conversation about the workplace, but also just like in a really practical way. People look at the pictures and they're like, wow, they should put up artwork, or they should do this, and it would just be better to have like paid parent leave, of course. But anything to improve the situation is good.
Right, God forbid they should give us like 6 months off.
It's like in Canada,
to be with the child.
When I showed this work to some curators in Canada, they like liked it. They're like, oh, we don't have these because we have such a long leave time. We don't really need lactation rooms.
right.
And it's also this contradiction, like right when women are told and like prescribed to pump longer than ever, like a year, that's when women are in the workforce more than ever.
Right.
So the question of like what that does to like women and
Did you face any of these issues in your academic career or in teaching and things like that? You wrote about it in your lecture, about specific comments that men have made to you that I loved your response.
I mean, I feel like all of us are talking about something that is so fundamental to gender differences and goes back to the beginning of the patriarchy, really, which is, male insecurity about paternity and other reasons that men try to control women's fertility has also seeped deeply, has its talons in the culture to such a deep level that it becomes about how much or how little freedom women have, not just in terms of their reproductive choices and health and rights and control over their own bodies, but also their creativity. And there's your picture, Nona, is just gives me chills, like of what it means to be a Black woman putting yourself in this space. It's really, I feel like all the work is so, I don't know if the younger women or like can even fully understand the way that the maternal body, depending on who we are and where we come from, has either been enslaved, tortured, utterly controlled or controlled in terms of the maternal imagination. Like, I just feel like that milk is not supposed to be there, and that's the feeling that I've had in my academic positions, in any work that I've ever done, that I'm not supposed to be there. My body's not supposed to be there, and the subject matter that really calls to me, and my work really coincided with having children. I had my kids pretty young, and so it wasn't like I was an artist for a long time and then had kids. They were just always together for me, and in a way that was helpful to me because I didn't know you weren't supposed to write baby poems until it was too late, and I was like, but yeah, I mean, comments from male critics, from students, from people on the street, from even men and women who consider themselves rather enlightened. This stuff goes really deep, and it's like very threatening. I don't really know why, but
I started in undergrad photographing mothers, young mothers. So I did a whole series of that. So that was always my focus for some reason. Then when I showed that work to get into grad school, I think I don't know whether it was reason why, but I think it was one of the reasons why I was waitlisted, because, and then I was like, you're a mother too, and I was talking, and I came also with new pictures of my baby, like, so they're like, and then when I started photographing, I got into the program and showed pictures again of my daughter, my life, other parents, their children. So I just boldly came in saying like, this is what it is, and this is who I am, whether you like it or not. But then I began to change and understand how to talk about that subject and those things in a newer kind of language in my work. So I did make it, I did evolve, but yeah, there's I think kind of a resistance, and I think it's women like us who just have to say, look, this is what it is, this is what I want to do, this is important to me, and now we see that 5 years later, everyone's talking about it.
Right. I mean, Corinne and I were talking about this in the other room, there's a long history of women who are artists who chose not to have children or had to give their children up.
Right.
And then there's also a long history, very painful to think about, of women who are artists and mothers and were separated from their children, either by necessity, I don't want to use the word choice, some of the great women artists, and it's no small thing to have your daughter here. It's a new thing, not without its complications, but yeah.
I've been grateful for that, for the change.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it's these sparks of influence, of positivity around it, around the community that we form together, whether it's other mothers or people that sort of give you that influence to kind of give you the next step, like you being one to me in some ways, to
to me,
right, and in a place that was not so accepting of us at the beginning, and then us sort of having each other to bring each other's voices up. Do you have anybody in your kind of arch that kind of
personal friends, or I have
just like a moment that might have kind of allowed you to be a little bit more vocal about it, or feel like a
I think even when I was in high school, I discovered Sally Mann's work, so that was, just in terms of role models in the art world, seeing oh, you can make really, really beautiful work about your family, that's real material. But I also remember my high school teacher mentioning this whole idea of consent and all the controversy around her work, so I was also aware of that right away, so that motherhood is very politicized, and and I was also aware of that. But I always in college there were there's one teacher of mine who's a fibers teacher who just like her life and her teaching and her artwork and her family, they were all kind of intertwined, and she talked about them in a way that just is like very natural in the classroom. So I think any of those, all those role models were important. You know, Moira Davies' book when I was pregnant, I mean, there's like art, you know, like knowing Lenka's work, Clayton's work before I had a kid. And then for me, the biggest lifeline is like I have so many good friends who happen to have kids around when I did, and they're all artists, and I like ask them about color balancing on like pictures at play dates, and we read over each other's, like we literally like work on our creative capital grants during play dates, and it's just like there's nothing like more important than those friendships since I had a kid, you know.
But I guess I feel like there is this positive, amazing change, and things are changing. But I will say, you know, I've been teaching at NYU graduate and undergrad poetry classes for 10, 11 years. I've only had 2 students the whole time who have children.
Right.
It's the university and graduate school is not set up to accommodate children whatsoever.
No.
You can't have a pregnancy, and you can't. I mean, it's at least in my experience, and I still see other professors, you know, calling the work, if it has if it has anything to do with motherhood, you know, it gets called sentimental. Which not necessarily sentimental. It's still very pervasive.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even when I explain the show, which is true, I say like you don't only have to look at this artwork through the lens of motherhood, and I say how it extends into all these other things, and I think, oh, am I like justifying the artwork by saying, you know, you can get it in all these other ways, like, you know, so I start questioning how I'm, you know, presenting it in that way.
Right, and then the other thing is like, it also depends so much on who you are in terms of what kind of access you have to resources. So, you know, if you're white and you're wealthy and, you know, you have support, you know, you're going to have different opportunities to be a mother and an artist, or be a mother and in the workplace. But, you know, it does not, those resources and opportunities are, you know, incredibly unequal, and I see that with my students. I see that, you know, in anybody who gets to go to graduate school.
Yeah, I couldn't have done it if I didn't have my mother and my sister helping me. But yeah, in grad school you don't see a lot of mothers or pregnant women. I remember after I graduated, there was a young woman in not the master's program, but in a general studies program, and she said she didn't tell anyone she was pregnant until she absolutely couldn't hide it anymore, because she feared the reaction of her professors, teachers, and the students, and that she would not be taken seriously.
Yeah. Well, I didn't tell anybody for the first whole semester of graduate school that I even had a child. And I was pumping in the bathroom. He was 5 months. So yeah.
A lot of things have changed. Some women are still, some artist mothers are still, in particular I would say, even though everyone who knows me or knows about my work or comes to know my work knows that I'm a mother, but it's not the first thing I put on my CV or my statement. But then there are other artist mothers who do say she's a mother of 2 or she's a mother of 1, you know, as well as an artist, etc., etc. So there's still, like, I think people who are on the fence about how they project or talk about themselves and and motherhood and having children, and you know how everyone deals with it differently.
And everybody works in a different way. So I'd love to hear, I think it's always a good, you know, kind of bridging on that community aspect of it. Like, do we subscribe to the Virginia Woolf's room of one's own still? And how do you all feel about like the space that you need to actually make that work?
Yeah, I still don't have a room of my own. No, I just make it wherever I can. I use the backyard, I use the kitchen, you know, wherever I can. Prospect Park is my room of my own, and when I go out and shoot, or I'm in the field or something, you know, doing my shoots. So yeah.
How about you, Corinne?
I did have like a free studio this past year, which is the first time I've had a studio. Well, actually, when I got home from the hospital, I saw like the person who I rented from my studio was like I hope you're gonna be out of your studio this weekend. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, what do you mean? And so I actually sent it to like my other old email account that like I had, like my husband basically, I was like had the baby and he had to go like move all my stuff out of my studio. So I lost my studio right when I had my kid, which felt like, oh my God, you know, the worst combination. But really, I'm not that much of a studio artist anyhow. Like I can work from home fine. I mean, I do some material that's a little bit morbid and dark, so I have to like really hide it from my daughter in case like it's under the bed, she might see the pictures. So there's certain projects I just can't work on at my house, so the content. But lactation rooms are fine to do in my apartment, and I like having the home studio to a degree. I hate it for studio visits, but for everything else, I can kind of, you know, I can make work anywhere, you know. I'll find a way to make it.
How about writing? Imagine.
I mean, I'd applied for writers' residencies where you go and you get, you know, they pay for your room and board, and it's like this incredible thing. I'd applied for them for years and years and years, and I remember I had a miscarriage after my first 2 kids and before my third, and I remember getting the rejection from McDowell, and I'd applied to all these writers' residencies, and I just remember weeping and feeling like, you don't understand, this is my opportunity to go, and it's not going to come again for a very, very long time. And when I did finally get to go to my first ever, you know, writers' colony, and I was there for 28 days, I mean, it was just, I almost didn't know how to handle it. It was the solitude, the room of one's own, mixed with being in a place with other artists where I could talk to them at night, and it was so, I almost still can't talk about it a year later. It was so profound and so unlike what my daily life is like, which is to say incredibly interrupted, at the beck and call of 3 very needy sons and a very needy husband, and you know, having been enculturated to fulfill these needs of these other people and really not knowing how to say no. I mean, the one other thing I wanted to say is, like, this work is extraordinary, but it's not just extraordinary to me because of the content, which is specifically this like very underrepresented and often taboo subject matter. It's also, I mean, the idea of what we are missing when we limit the maternal imagination is not just important to other mothers or other women, it's important to men. Because like and to some extent, everybody in the culture right now is so interruptible and distracted.
Right.
That's, maybe mothers have had that experience for longer, but how do you make art out of that? Or how if you want to be a man who is in relationship to other human beings in like a deep way, how do you meet the needs of other people and make art? Like, it's, you know, maybe mothers have something to teach everybody if we would like listen to them and look at what they're making. Yeah, being alone in a room of one's own is a very deep topic.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question.
I think the only time I get a room of my own is when I go out to universities and colleges and give artist talks, and then I'm in the hotel room of my own,
Right.
a room of my own, and I don't know what to do with myself, and I get freaked out, you know, and ghosts in here, you know, so it's yeah, that's the only time.
I one time heard my godmother, who was a photographer when her 3 kids were really little, said the reason she took up photography was because she knew when she was in her dark room that she couldn't open the door without ruining the film or the print. And so without that, like, almost like technical necessity, she would always open the door.
Right.
I don't know if that's like, if that like process gives you some protection or no?
Well, I do digital now, so. But I'm thinking of going back to black and white, so maybe things will change.
But yeah, I mean, like for me, for this other project, I mean, I get to like meet the world is sort of my studio, and I get to like meet these women at work when they're like pumping and they're busy in the middle of their busy day and they're pumping milk, and this is very intense year when they like left this baby at home and they're leaving them for the first time and they're trying to juggle all these things, and like the phone's ringing and there's like the people that, like the women I've met have had the craziest phone calls that they've been like handling while pumping, while having me photograph, and it's like really like this amazing. Every time I visit one of these women and photograph their space, I like learn so much, and I have such interesting conversations, and it's like very meaningful. So that's also my studio.
I mean, I also noticed, not only in the community of getting feedback and everything like that, I've noticed, you in particular, you have a podcast, right? And you're curating a show. And Nona, you're very involved with a lot of different, a lot of different artists on lots of panels. And it's like, it's interesting to see how we kind of outreach to bring people together, perhaps. And do you think that that's something that is maternal for you, or specific to your practice as a mother artist, or how do you feel like that plays in your practice overall, your creative practice? Your outreach to bring people together or to bring a different conversation up?
Well, I personally, someone asked me at one of the schools I visited, like, how did I make this transition in my work from the images of mitochondria about my family to the White Shoe series, to the monuments, and I realized it was because I had was traveling and meeting people and seeing things and doing things, that I was able to make these diverse, distinct groups of images and series. And so I've always been a people person and always needed that contact. And I'm real chatterbox online, and I got like 4 or 5 pages going.
Right.
So, but that's essential to who I am.
Right.
And it took me a while to understand that. But I think about the story my mom told me the first time she took me to my new school. And she said it was in this private school out in Mill Basin, Brooklyn. And she said by the end of the orientation, everyone knew me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I don't even remember. But she said, like, everyone knew me and loved me, and and it just was. I was like, oh, it's so sweet, So that's who I am, and that's how I think my work speaks to kind of a world view, even though I am an African American woman. You see that in my images and in the other series, but often I think I feel I'm speaking to a wider audience, and that a wider audience can connect with the work and the topic that I'm speaking, and even I was on a panel with another artist. He's a white male, and afterward he told me, like, he almost could cry looking at the images, and I realized that there was this universal thing that went across all, male, female, children, all colors and races can connect.
And your podcast is similar in the online content.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast, I'm going to say, is it's lots of things, but I mean, I've always thought of art as a community building activity, rather than the kind of like, macho image of like the solo artist, making work alone,
Yep.
That's never been what art is for me. The podcast feels like this deep honor and social necessity, and a responsibility. I mean, it's enabled me to build a significant platform, at least for poetry, and then introduce the listeners to the work and voices of marginalized and underrepresented authors that they wouldn't necessarily hear, because just like in the world, we tend to read the work of other people who look like us, which is fucked up. And so particularly at this time, I was like, well, this might be the way that I could contribute the most and really try to basically kick white supremacy in the balls as much as possible. At the same time, I'm going to admit that there's like a totally selfish female ambition part of the podcast, which is, you know, as the mother of 3 and in a heterosexual relationship, I often feel very unheard. And because I have this podcast and I can track how many people are downloading it, I know people are listening to me. That's really weird. I'm not gonna lie, like that's part of it. So it was a way for me to both
that's
be.
your reassurance.
Yeah.
We all like those numbers.
Yeah.
You know, they give us validation.
And people also take me seriously in a different way, and I had to build that myself. Like it wasn't gonna. I'm not a full-time professor. I'm an adjunct. I'm, you know, I had to make that myself. Nobody was going to give that to me. I applied for, you know, everything you could think of and was rejected. So it's both.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think it was because of the nature of your work and that you talk about, you know, motherhood and your work?
That I got rejected for everything. I had one job interview for a job I really desperately wanted, and they asked me all kinds of illegal questions, and it was my thesis advisor from graduate school, actually, a woman, who really sabotaged me and said, everyone in this room knows you have children, and it was a job in Boston that I was going to commute to, which I was like, that's my room of my own.
Yeah.
This sounds great. I'm going to commute to Boston. Fabulous. And she said, we all know you have children. I mean, are you really going to take this job? And I said, yes, I'm really going to take this job. And as I started to say it, the chair of the department, who was a man, said, that's an illegal question. You're not allowed to answer it. You're not allowed to ask it. But Rachel, if you'd like to answer it, please go ahead. And you know, I think yes. I think it does have to do with it, both the subject matter and also, I don't know, something. I mean, maybe there are a lot of better poets than me, so it could be that too. But I think something about me makes certain people very uncomfortable.
No. Yeah, no, it happens. No, you know, the stories that mothers and new mothers can tell you, or pregnant women can tell you about the job. Like, I was laid off literally 6 months after I gave birth. And listen, even though it was a technical layoff, I feel it was a firing. And I feel I was the first one to get laid off in the whole office. So, and you know, really, what a real shitty thing to do, to lay off a new mother, you know, a single mother at that, you know, and they know what they're doing, these people. You know, one of my friends, you know, and our former classmate, she was pregnant, and she went through a whole process of interviews, and then when she got to the last interview and walked in, it was a different man who interviewed her, and she said he took one look at her stomach and she knew right then she was not going to get the position. So it's really awful, and I think it's one of the reasons why I said, well, hell, if I'm going to be rejected, or you know, or just, you know, I might as well go and do what I truly love and take a chance at that, you know, instead of working in the nonprofit world, art world that I worked in.
I'd love to hear another one of your poems.
Okay, so this is from my book, The Pedestrians, and the title is Please Alice Notley, Tell Me How to Be Old. And I just want to say that Alice Notley is one of my favorite poets. my friend Ariel Greenberg and I co-edited an anthology called Women Poets on Mentorship, where we realized that most of the women in the generation above us had only been taught by men. And there was this idea around mentorship, a very male idea of like, you know, kill the father, and, you know, but my generation had many female professors, many female mentors and role models, and it felt like a very life-saving, not always good, but we wanted to document that. And Alice Notley is one of the poets. She started writing in the 70s, and she was married to the poet Ted Berrigan. He was married to her. And they had 2 sons, and her sons show up in her poems a lot. And she is just an amazing force, just incredible. And just one more thing about her, which is she wrote this book called The Descent of Alet, which is really one of, I think, the most important contemporary female epics, and one of the very few epics written by a woman. So that's who I'm talking to, or talking to and about, if you don't know who Alice Notley is. Please, Alice Notley, tell me how to be old. But don't read this poem whose title implies, I think you're old, but you are, at least older than I am. I don't mean just time passing, though that makes everyone old unless death, and I don't want that, which is not to say I'm terrified, but don't not read this poem because you've died. I'd rather insult you. What I mean is, oh, look, I think the rookie cops are graduating today. Times Square is a sea of blues. There's a secret staircase at the end of the shuttle platform that takes me right to my therapist's office, but you don't live here anymore. Anyway, Alice, I haven't got much time, or maybe I have, no one knows. I want to tell you that all the people who say they love me are siphoning me, feeding off me, not like they did when they were babies, but eating away at me. For a while, my soul seemed to fly out of my body, but I didn't know that's what had happened. I didn't know I was a living dead they talk about in sci-fi books until today, when it flew back in and I woke up with my soul intact. The days and days of rain made my city as clean as it can get. I ran around the bridle path, not dressed warmly enough. Like a good horse, my breath soft and white. I listened to a podcast of Dharma talks. May all sentient beings feel and know happiness and the causes of happiness. I do today feel happy. And now on the subway, I just read your poem that starts with your kids talking and thought, oh, children and poems. But you're old now, and maybe I am too. We already lived that life with young children. While I was running, I really felt happy, felt I knew the cause of happiness, felt my soul had returned to my body. I shuddered to realize how like a living dead I'd been. You seem so alive to me. Your language so human, angry, real happy, and also the cause of these things. I'm passing the daycare now on a bus to pick up my middle son. My oldest boy's walking home alone, which he doesn't like to do. How I must trust the universe, how it fills and siphons me. But you, with your fuck you beauty and siren song, no, not siren. You're not stopping the boats, but rather pushing us along. What I want to know is how to be old and strong and not care so much. By which I mean care so much, as I always do and always will, but not care about how much I care. My therapist asked, do you lose a lot of hands in poker? And said I was a bad negotiator. Said I need to tolerate I tolerate too much emotional chaos and put the needs of others before my own. What, I asked, is the alternative? He gave me nothing. Maybe because I'm a bad negotiator? How could a woman write an epic, you wrote? How could she now if she were to decide the times called for one? But you did. Even though you wrote, women are more likely to write something lyrical elegiac or polemical rather than epic or near epic. So I'm asking you not just how to be old, but how to be a woman, as if my girlhood, I'm asking you not how to be old, but how to be a woman, as my girlhood, if I ever had one, is over now, really gone. And I feel the sharp pain when my son does not call when he said he would. How can any mother write an epic when my fear receding behind his small-voiced apology like a little nodule in my right breast, safe, safe, when I'm so terribly interruptible?
So we can open it up to some questions.
What is your podcast called?
It's called Commonplace, Conversations with Poets and Other People. It's really awesome. It's really, really long. It's conversations with poets, but also other artists. I've had some visual artists and a feminist nonfiction writer, and it's really cool.
You guys talk a lot about the struggles of being mothers, being working mothers. Can you, my thoughts. So if you had struggles on the sort of back end with yourself navigating being a mother and making work, let alone society and the world around. Can you talk about that? How the journey of becoming a working artist mother, or being an artist becoming a mother, and bringing those things all together? How that?
It is hard. It really is hard. Not so much as being the mother and being the artist, but being the artist and developing a practice and keeping that up in the midst of everything you have going. And there are times that you do have to yourself, but because there's so many things you want to do, which do I choose first? And but I think fundamentally you have to ask yourself what is important to you, what truly is important to you. And for me, you're always going to put your child first. You try to as much as possible, but then the work is equally as important to me. And I often say, like, it's the only thing I got, and if it's the only thing you got, then you got to make that work. And so I often also think about other artists and their ambition and how do they also make it work. So there are examples, and I often spend time on YouTube listening to artist talks, not just of women but men too, male artists. I envy a lot of male artists, even the ones who do have children and wives, and how they are able to have these grand big careers and go off and do all these projects. And I know that I can assume that their wives are picking up most of the slack for them. And they miss out on things too, and not being able to fully probably be there. But no, I'm always looking for examples. I'm always thinking about the work. Even when I'm not making it, I'm thinking about how to make the next piece and what it's going to be about. And I've been blessed that when I do that, finally come to make the piece, it happens very quickly. I guess because I've spent so much time thinking about it, and I only got one shot, I only got a certain amount of time to do it, and we got to nail it. Mm-hmm. So I've been blessed in that respect.
For me, I already had been had a sort of set studio practice before I got pregnant, but I do a lot of long-term projects, so the only thing I really planned was I need to have a project underway that I'm like really involved in before I have a kid. Like, so I wanted to start a new project before I was like started trying to get pregnant. And that actually worked out really well, because it's hard for me to like start a new project and let go of an old project. And so, you know, like I was like 8.5 months pregnant. No, I was like a few weeks before giving birth, and I was doing like a big shoot, a film shoot at NYU Hospital. And then after, I think for me the hardest part was like the baby and the toddler years. I had no idea how expensive childcare would be. I was clueless and I was shocked. And at the time my husband had like a less flexible job, so I really didn't have much of a babysitter to speak of for those first 2 years, and except during the exact hours I was teaching. And so I don't even know how, I had a solo show when my daughter was like 2. I have no idea how I did it. I just like, on weekends at nighttime, I barely slept anyway, so what's not sleeping anymore when you're already like deranged, you know, sleep deprived. But I think the hardest thing for me was like, and I talked about it with my other friend who was a writer, like hire a babysitter when you needed to do work, but it's not like the artwork is gonna pay for the babysitter, so just like kind of having to like accept this whole different way of thinking about spending money to do work, and then like having to like really decide, okay, well, this work is meaningful to me, like you said, it's all I got, like it's meaningful to my family. By extension, I have to like allow myself, and it wasn't like I could hire a babysitter a lot, because I just literally could not afford it, but still, like sometimes you have to hire a babysitter, and it's okay if your shoot sucks and you don't get any pictures from it, but, so that was hard for me to like make that decision, to like, I had to like make a real like set decision that I would appreciate it, and then I think, now it's like a lot easier because my daughter is in kindergarten, and so there's, you know, still not that many hours of the day. My husband's like completely equal in terms of caregiving and everything. And like, so when I leave and I go to town, like I've been teaching in Boston this semester, and I don't have to feel guilty. Like our whole family life is being carried on without me, and my daughter's completely happy, you know, so I'm lucky.
Yeah, blessed.
I answered that super fast, which is just like, I mean, there was so much motivation for me also, like, and a lot of power in that. Like, I was like, wait, my experience of pregnancy, birth, nursing, motherhood, I haven't seen this described in the way that I'm experiencing this, and it made me enraged. Like, why did I not know how boring it was? Like, why did I not know how that feeling, like I just remember the first time I left to go buy a new nursing bra because I didn't have enough, and I became completely terrified that I was gonna die just on my 15-minute walk, and what was gonna happen to my kid. Like I didn't know, those were new emotions, and I felt really emboldened to tell those stories in a way that I don't think I would have if it was just like my life, you know, or something. So there was a lot of power in that.
Oh no, I actually have a comment and maybe some advice. So, because as a gay man, I don't know much about motherhood. Not yet.
Do you have a mother?
I do. So I have an appreciation. Well, actually, I'm just starting to get an appreciation. She's now 83 and I'm now 50, and I'm just starting to get the appreciation. Like, oh, you did what? And you had to go to night school, and what'd you do with me? But the interesting was I came here, got introduced in the other room, and I was thinking, okay, this is going to be a thing about motherhood. And then I was listening to the poem, and I'm just like, okay, I now feel better about dying. Wait a second, this has nothing to do with mom and whatever. I feel better about dying, right? So like there's a comment, and then I feel better about being in the world, and I feel better about just being who I am, no matter what is expected. So all of a sudden, doesn't seem so mommy-ish to me, but then to have the discussion about what it's like, I'm thinking, it's kind of rough actually. And then I'm thinking to myself, that's true, I'm giving some people that work for me a little bit of a hard time right now, because one just became a mom, and another partner who I'm about to get, I think she may become a mom soon. If that relationship works out. So I'm evaluating whether I want to be partners with her. And the first one is I actually poached her from another company, and she had to go through like IVF and IVF and IVF, and finally, no one thought it would happen, and it actually happened. And she was such a performer, right? Nothing stopped her. And now she's pumping a lot, and I hear it in the background and stuff, and I'm just like, okay. And I've noticed, just quite transparently, she doesn't have the exact, because honestly what we do in this, it's apparel, right, sweaters, I mean, who really gives a shit, honestly, right? But, especially when you have a life to take care of, so I get it, but at the same time, like, we gotta do the job. So then there's another woman who's starting, who's, MBA from Harvard, and just like ambitious, and she's just like, and I see the two, and instead of having her report to this woman, I've had them separate, working on different accounts. And I've noticed there's this competition between them. So the new mom is kind of like, oh, she's inexperienced, she's not doing this right, and then this one is kind of like, I'm taking care of everything all night long, all day long, every minute of the day I'm devoted to this. And so I'm giving her more responsibility, and then this one is like feeling like I'm, and honestly I don't think she actually, it's not as matters to her as much. So I think in the long term, I'm like, yes, I'm devoting responsibility depending on who can handle it, or who wants it. You can tell who wants it, who can handle it. And I think, well, maybe after time, she'll get, the new mom will get more time or want more, and then I'll give it to her when she's ready. So I wanted to know what you guys think of that situation.
Well, I can tell you, Jay.
Put your best on.
It's a lot. But I would say just be as humanly kind as possible to the mom, but all the women that you have employed, and grateful to you that you've employed women. But just being human and allowing her to do the things that she has to do.
Yes. And
stay employed.
So yeah, I have no problem with, I'm thinking long term too. I think long term, years from now.
Yeah.
And my perspective is, it's like how much work can you handle, and handle it effectively, and have your life, and do everything else.
Right.
But she wants to have it all, have all the responsibility.
Oh yeah, we put pressure on ourselves too, to be superwomen,
My thought is, why,
to have it all.
Right, can you not have it all, but then manage everything so that you do what you have well?
I would just pretend she did, aside from giving her pumping breaks and if normal sick days and those sort of protections that hopefully everyone has in our company, aside from that, I wouldn't treat her any differently than anyone else. I would pretend she doesn't even have a kid. Because I don't think it should come into any of your decision making. That's
how I do it. I just go, okay, this is the performance, this is the production that comes out of it. Where am I getting the most production, and it goes that way. I don't even think about that per se, but I think she thinks about that a lot.
Maybe I would say in terms of to go from this back to the artwork for a second, which is to say, we all have a legal and ethical responsibility to treat other people, to make sure everyone has equal access to jobs, opportunities, the means of production, gainful employment, to not discriminate against someone, which essentially that is a form of gender discrimination. But I think maybe it's also interesting to me to think about these pictures right here are so beautiful to me, and I think that there are things that each of us only notices or is uniquely qualified to do and make and conceive of because of our identities, right? And because of our lived experience. And it's not that we want to turn everybody into a worker or the most productive, most efficient worker, because the institutions that we have are so flawed, right? It's not just about like fitting ourselves into, like doing it all and hiding the pregnancies, which I've done also, and but also like, well, what do we miss if we're all trying to fit into the institutions as they are? I feel, I don't know why these ones are like really speaking to me right now, but this, to not see these things is so damaging. Like, I know from my lived experience and thinking about it and reading about it and writing about it, that my relationship with my sons is not based on the story of Oedipus, which it's like the only model in certain ways to talk about the relationship between mothers and sons. That is not my relationship with my sons. There is a deep love that is very physical, that is, that is a bond that I have not seen written about other than to pathologize that relationship between mothers and sons. So if I don't write about that, that's not in the culture, and that hurts you. That hurts everybody, right, who's ever had a mother. So I don't know what this exact situation is, but there may be something that individual person can bring to whatever workplace or whatever situation that there is that you could say like, oh, well, now she doesn't have a lot of time and she's tired, but there's something else that she may think and know now because of those experiences that you could never get without that lived experience. So I don't know, maybe there's a way to, and like, everyone else should not be working so fucking hard.
Yeah, we work entirely too much in this country, and it's really having a whole mental, a heavy consequence on our mental capacity, our interactions with one another, how we function in society, how we treat our children. It's just way too much. We're a society that is getting, to me, sicker and sicker.
Yeah.
And it's a reflection of how, broken we've become.
And then I also think like the idea of being like us putting out motherhood as being difficult. I think like also to me it's not like right now, like my daughter's 5.5, and honestly like the first 2 years that was hard. It's not that difficult. Like I just get so much more, like I'm so much happier in my life. I feel like I'm still making art in a way. My career is doing even better. Like I feel like my project is like more political because my daughter's in the world and I'm thinking about the world I want her to be in. So I think it's like more personal and more political, and I have a lot of time at the playground in the sun, and it's great. Like like motherhood is not just difficult; it's mostly just great for me right now, and I am lucky. But
Yeah.
I realized too that I'm the first of 2 generations of women who could afford to stay home with my daughter and raise my daughter, and then decide I wasn't going back into the 9-to-5, corporate or nonprofit, that I would pursue my own dream, of being an artist and do that. And so I'm like the first of my generation and, of my family, and that, to be able to make that choice.
Any other questions?
Someone young who might be scared to ask a question. You were the first one, which I appreciate.
Well, thank you for such an amazing, diverse, unbelievable conversation, real conversation, and I appreciate every one of you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.